Close your eyes for a moment and notice where you feel like you are. Most people feel as if they're sitting somewhere behind their eyes, tucked inside the skull, watching the world through two small windows. It feels obvious, natural, almost unquestionable. That's where you are, right? Richard Feynman discovered that this feeling is completely wrong, not metaphorically wrong, not philosophically poetic, scientifically wrong. And once you understand why, the idea of self never feels the same again. In the early 1950s, at a laboratory in Los Angeles, a strange experiment was being prepared. The setup was simple but unsettling: a soundproof, light-proof tank filled with warm salt water, perfectly matched to body temperature. The water was dense enough to support the body completely, removing the sensation of gravity. No light, no sound, no pressure, no temperature changes, no touch. The goal was sensory deprivation. Remove every external signal the brain uses to construct reality and observe what happens to the mind. Feynman wasn't searching for enlightenment or mystical insight. He was curious. He wanted to see what the brain would do when stripped of information. So he climbed into the tank. The lid closed, and the world disappeared. At first, everything felt normal. He could feel his body. He knew where his arms and legs were. He was floating, but still located, still contained. Then, after about 20 minutes, something unsettling began to happen. His sense of bodily position started to dissolve. An arm felt misplaced, then absent, then irrelevant. The boundary between his body and the surrounding water blurred. Eventually, that boundary vanished entirely. There was no clear sense of where he ended and the world began. For the first time in his life, Feynman experienced consciousness without location. He was awake, thinking, aware but nowhere. At first, it was terrifying. Then it became fascinating because it revealed something fundamental. The feeling of being located somewhere in space isn't automatic. It's constructed. It's assembled by the brain using sensory input. And when that input disappears, the construction collapses. Right now, you feel like you're behind your eyes because your brain tells you that's where you are. But your eyes aren't windows. They're sensors. Light hits the retina, triggers chemical reactions, sends electrical signals through the optic nerve. And those signals are processed at the back of your brain, not the front. So why don't you feel like you're in the back of your head? Because the brain builds a model of the world, and in that model, it places a reference point. A "you are here" marker. That marker gets placed at the center of sensory input, where vision, hearing, and touch converge. Forward-facing eyes create a forward-facing sense of self. It's useful, efficient, and completely illusory. There is no observer sitting behind your eyes. No tiny person watching a screen inside your head. The idea leads to an infinite regress. An observer watching an observer forever. Neuroscience calls this the homunculus fallacy. What's actually happening is simpler and stranger. The brain processes data and generates experience. Perspective is part of that experience, not the source of it. And once you understand that, it becomes disturbingly easy to move the self. In a classic experiment known as the rubber hand illusion, participants sit at a table with one real hand hidden. A realistic rubber hand is placed in view. Both hands, the real one and the fake one, are stroked simultaneously with brushes. Within minutes, people begin to feel that. The rubber hand is their hand. When the rubber hand is threatened, they flinch. The brain doesn't care that the hand is fake. It cares about correlation. Visual input and tactile input match in time and rhythm. So the brain concludes ownership. Body identity is inferred, not hardwired. If ownership can be reassigned that easily, then location can too. In 2007, neuroscientists pushed this further. Participants wore virtual reality goggles that showed them their own body from several feet behind. One researcher touched their chest. Another touch was synchronized in the empty space where the camera appeared to be within seconds. Participants felt like they were located behind their bodies floating, observing themselves from outside. Brain scans confirmed it. The region responsible for self-location shifted activity to match the camera's position. A full out-of-body experience, produced on demand. No soul leaving the body. No astral projection. Just the brain updating its model based on altered sensory data. This is what Feynman understood after stepping out of the tank. Consciousness doesn't live anywhere. The brain has a location. Neurons exist in space. Electrical signals travel through tissue. But consciousness, the experience itself, is not an object. It's a process. And processes don't have coordinates. A fire has flames, but combustion itself isn't located anywhere. It's what the system is doing. Consciousness is the same. You can say it happens in the brain, but not where it is. And once you remove the illusion of location, the idea of a fixed, centralized self begins to dissolve. You are not something sitting inside your body. You are what your body, especially your brain, is doing. As unsettling as this realization is, it gets even deeper, because once you accept that consciousness has no fixed location, you're forced to confront a much harder question. If the mind isn't somewhere, then what exactly is it? Feynman didn't believe the mind was a mysterious substance, floating beyond physics. He believed the opposite. The mind is not a thing at all. It's an activity, a pattern, something that happens when matter is arranged in a very specific way and starts processing information about itself. This distinction matters more than it sounds. We are used to thinking of ourselves as objects. Objects have boundaries. Objects have locations. Objects can be pointed to. But processes are different. A process isn't where it's what. You can point to a brain and say that's where neural activity happens. But you can't point to consciousness itself and say it's right there. Because consciousness is the activity, not a separate entity produced by the activity. This becomes obvious when you look at how the brain actually works. Your brain doesn't process the world in one place. Color is processed in one region, motion in another, shape in another, sound somewhere else entirely. There is no single room inside your head where everything comes together. No control center, no inner theater where an observer watches the show. Yet your experience feels unified. When you see a red ball bouncing and hear it hit the floor, you don't experience redness in one place, motion in another, and sound in a third. You experience one event, a single, seamless moment. This is known as the binding problem, and neuroscience still doesn't fully understand how the brain solves it. The leading theory is synchronization. Neurons in different regions fire together in coordinated rhythms. When their timing aligns, the brain treats their signals as belonging to the same object or event. Unity emerges from coordination, not from centralization, and that has a profound implication. If there is no single place where experience is assembled, then there is no single place where you are. Your mind is distributed. It's happening across many regions at once, constantly updating, constantly shifting. The sense of a single, centered self is an illusion created by coherence, not by location. This becomes even clearer when the brain's normal integration is disrupted. In the 1960s, surgeons began treating severe epilepsy by cutting the corpus callosum, the bundle of fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. This prevented seizures from spreading, but it also revealed something shocking. After the surgery, patients appeared normal in everyday life. But under controlled experiments, something strange emerged. Two independent streams of consciousness inside one skull. The left hemisphere could speak, but lacked visual awareness of the left field. The right hemisphere could see but couldn't speak. Show an object to one side of the visual field, and only one hemisphere knew it existed. In some cases, the two halves even disagreed. One hand would button a shirt, while the other tried to unbutton it. One side preferred one object, the other preferred something else. Two intentions, two agents, one body. So where was the self? Was there one you? Or two? There was no clear answer. And that deeply unsettled the idea of a single, indivisible mind located somewhere in the brain. If cutting a connection can divide consciousness, then consciousness is not a thing, it's an emergent pattern. And patterns can be split, merged, altered, or dissolved. This reinforced what Feynman had already begun to understand. The unity of self is not fundamental. It's biological, constructed, fragile. And if that's true, then the boundaries of the mind might not stop at the skull at all in cognitive science. There's a concept known as the extended mind hypothesis. The idea is simple but radical. Thinking doesn't happen only inside the brain. It extends into the environment. When you write something down so you don't forget it, that notebook becomes part of your memory system. When you use a calculator, the calculation happens outside your brain, but it's still part of your thinking. When you rely on GPS to navigate, your spatial reasoning is distributed between neurons and software. Your mind isn't confined. It's embedded. Feynman understood this intuitively. He was famous for working through problems on paper, not because he couldn't do them mentally, but because writing was his thinking. The symbols on the page weren't representations of thought. They were components of the thinking process itself. Your brain offloads work into tools, language, diagrams, and other people. Conversations are shared cognitive systems. Knowledge lives not only in neurons, but in books, equations, and collective memory. So ask the question again, where is your mind? Not in one place, not even in one organ. It's distributed across your brain, your body, your tools, and the environment you interact with. And this leads to a realization that feels almost impossible at first. There is no fixed you observing reality from a single point. There is only a dynamic system continuously modeling the world and itself within it. The sense of perspective, the feeling that you are here, looking out from somewhere, is part of the model. Not the source of consciousness. This explains something else people often misunderstand. Out-of-body experiences. These experiences are not evidence of souls leaving bodies. They're evidence that the brain's self-location model can be disrupted. Drugs, trauma, meditation, sensory deprivation, brain stimulation, anything that alters sensory integration can shift the perceived location of the self, but nothing actually leaves. There's no you that can float outside the body. There is only a brain generating an unusual self-model. And once you see that, the consequences become unavoidable. If you are your brain's activity, then changes to the brain change you. Brain damage can alter personality. Injury can erase memories. Disease can reshape behavior. There is no untouched soul watching from behind the scenes. This idea makes people uncomfortable because it strips away comforting metaphors. But it also reveals something extraordinary. You are not a static object trapped in a body. You are a process, a pattern of matter and energy that, for a brief time, knows it exists. And patterns don't live somewhere. They happen. Once you truly accept that the mind has no fixed location, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The way you think about identity, fear, death, and meaning starts to shift. Not emotionally at first, but structurally. The assumptions underneath your thoughts quietly collapse. Most of our fear comes from thinking of ourselves as fragile objects. Objects can be damaged. Objects can be lost. Objects can be destroyed. When you think of yourself as a thing sitting somewhere behind your eyes, every threat feels personal. Every mistake feels like an attack on who you are. But processes are different. A process doesn't need to be protected in the same way an object does. A process unfolds. It changes. It adapts. It flows. And eventually it ends not by being taken away, but by completing its course. This is why understanding consciousness as a process, rather than a place, changes how you relate to life itself. Feynman understood this late in his life, when illness forced him to confront the reality of death without comforting illusions. He didn't believe consciousness traveled somewhere else when the brain stopped. He believed it ended. And instead of making life meaningless, this made it precious. Because if consciousness is what happens when matter briefly organizes itself in a particular way, then every moment of awareness is extraordinary. Think about it. The universe existed for billions of years without experience. Stars formed. Galaxies collided. Atoms danced blindly through space. And then, on at least one planet, matter arranged itself in such a way that it could know it was there, not forever, not even for long. But long enough to ask questions. You are not separate from the universe, observing it from the outside. You are the universe experiencing itself locally, temporarily, imperfectly. And this reframes the question of identity in a radical way. If your mind is a pattern, then you are not a fixed entity carried from moment to moment. You are continuity, not permanence. The you of 5 years ago is not identical to the you of today. Different memories, different beliefs, different neural wiring, yet there is a sense of persistence. Why? Because the pattern maintains coherence over time, even as its components change. Just like a flame remains the same flame, even though none of the molecules are the same from one second to the next. You are a flame, not a stone. This also explains why meditation, deep focus, or moments of intense absorption can feel like the self disappears. In those moments, the brain stops emphasizing the self model. The narrative quiets. The sense of being someone located somewhere fades, but experience doesn't stop. Awareness remains, which tells us something important. The self is not the same as consciousness. The self is a story the brain tells to organize behavior. Consciousness is the activity within which that story appears. This distinction matters, because suffering is often tied to over-identifying with the story. When you think I am my thoughts, every negative thought feels like truth. When you think I am my emotions, every emotional wave feels permanent. But when you recognize thoughts and emotions as events within a process, not the owner of the process, something loosens, you don't disappear. You gain space, and this perspective aligns with what neuroscience keeps showing us. The brain is constantly predicting, modeling, correcting. It builds a version of reality that works well enough for survival, not a perfectly accurate one. The sense of self is part of that model, useful, adaptive, but not fundamental. This is why the mind can be tricked so easily. Virtual reality can shift your sense of location. Illusions can override logic. Expectations can change perception. The brain doesn't show you the world as it is. It shows you the world as it expects it to be, updated by sensory input, and you are embedded inside that prediction, not controlling it, not watching it from outside, participating in it. Once you see this, certain debates lose their grip. Free will, for example, becomes less about absolute control and more about degrees of influence within a system. You are not an independent agent floating above causality, but you are also not a passive puppet. You are a self-regulating process capable of reflection, learning, and adjustment. Responsibility doesn't disappear. It changes form. You are responsible not because you are a metaphysical soul, but because you are a system that can respond to information, anticipate outcomes, and modify behavior. And this understanding dissolves another illusion, the need for a permanent core. Many people fear that without a fixed self, life becomes meaningless. But the opposite is true. Meaning doesn't come from permanence, it comes from participation. Music is meaningful because it ends. Conversations matter because they pass. Life matters because it unfolds and then stops. If consciousness were eternal and unchanging, it would lose significance. It is precisely because this process is temporary that each experience matters. Feynman once said that understanding reality deeply doesn't make it colder, it makes it more astonishing. And that applies here. You are not less because you are a process. You are more. Because for a brief window in cosmic history, matter has arranged itself into something that can wonder, doubt, imagine, and understand. And when the process ends, nothing is stolen. Nothing is taken away. The universe simply returns to being what it was before this pattern arose. No destination, no continuation, no location, just completion. So where is your mind? Not in your head, not in your body, not in a soul, not in a hidden dimension. Your mind is what your brain does, a distributed, dynamic activity, a pattern that models the world in itself, a temporary organization of matter that experiences. And the feeling of being someone somewhere is part of that experience, not its source. Once you truly grasp this, the question stops being frightening. It becomes liberating. You are not trapped inside a body. You are not watching life from behind your eyes. You are not a thing waiting to be preserved. You are happening. And right now, that happening is aware. That is enough.